way that we get to see them in a story. So everything else, everything that they, it does go beyond that because there's also what they don't say, which is subtext.
Sure.
But
And what they do, right?
and what they do.
And what they don't do.
But exactly. But at the end of the day, it is like this is how you figure out what they're going to say, and what they say is like expressing a very important part of who they are. Um, and you're right. Like when I'm writing dialogue, I kind of like when I'm writing, I kind of just completely zone out and am imagining what they would say. Like it's not like I have to build it enough that I can do that I can kind of just say like, okay, now go, and kind of like let it roll out in my head.
So the real question then comes down to, okay, how much preparation does it take for you or a different type of writer to get to the place where you feel comfortable making the voice happen in a scene, right? And most people have done outlining work
Yeah.
before they do that, right? Like John really advocates specifically for really have a tight developed beat sheet before you start writing scenes, and different people have different opinions on that. But like if you've done an outline, you've done preparation on like what the story is, right? So it's kind of like outside of the outline of the overall structure of the story, maybe what kind of development do we do to make sure that the voice on the page is aligned with like the character we want in the outline?
Yeah. No, I think that I had two answers happen at the same time, which was less than you think, but also, at the same time, it's like deeper than you think, right? Like
Right.
I think there's less that you need to know about them
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. Like, I don't necessarily need to know that they have like 7 freckles on their right arm. I don't even really need to
Absolutely.
know that
Yeah.
they have like blue eyes. I don't need to know every single thing about them, but I need to know what those formative things are that make them who they are. So it's like
Sometimes it's
less.
just one piece of information, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a character, because it depends how important the character is, right? Like if you're protagonist, you need to know a lot more to make the voice happen and consistent than say, Rainn Wilson's character in Juno, you know,
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
who serves a function in the scene, but that character has great dialogue and a very active voice, right? Like you get a vibe of that person in a very vivid way, even
No.
though they're only in that one introductory scene. And you could assume that there isn't a full detailed backstory for that character. Um,
You know what this project of like us having to pull up 2 different development tools really reminded me of? When I was young and like in middle school and high school, I met these like other writers, right? I did like this like Kentucky camp and like met these other writers, and one of them had all of these books that I thought were just the coolest thing in the entire world, where it was like adjectives to describe your character, or like,
mm,
like 1,000 questions to figure out who your character is, or like types of bad guys. Like it was like all these different books that were just like stacks and stacks and stacks of character development stuff. And I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And I really kind of fell down the rabbit hole of being like, I have to fill all of this out before I know who this person is. And
yeah.
so that's why I now, and like I lean much more towards, it's not about, you don't have to know everything, but you have to know the formative stuff. Um,
Interesting.
and yeah, but I love those books. I would still be a sucker for them. Sometimes I'd go to Barnes and Noble and just
They're fun.
look at like the writing resources section. They're so much fun. It's
And
so
I
much
think this kind of comes down to our ideological difference, which is I don't really care as much about things that aren't in the frame
Yeah.
as you do, because I think it's about what excites us, what gives us energy. Like
Yeah.
for me, I'm like, I have made up characters on the spot in a scene because of a
Yeah.
function. Like, oh, there should be a friend. Boom, I'm writing the scene, and my outline changes, right? And then I have to reincorporate. Then there's more work that comes from that. But like, sometimes a voice just happens because you
Yeah.
need to fill a joke or something. Something. The function in the moment was not apparent when you were writing the outline, and when you're on the page writing scenes, you're like, oh, there's a function that needs to be met. I need to invent a person on the spot, and sometimes I'll just, okay, this is this voice, this is this character. I'm
Yeah.
just gut, flying by the seat of my pants and trying something, right? And would it be better if I necessarily left those decisions to some prep work? Maybe not. But I'll just share my first
Yeah,
development
do it.
tool. This is something that I have found to be the most useful thing for finding characters and character voices. It's before writing a project for every key character. And I'm not talking about like ancillary characters who have like one scene. I'd be like the key 3 to 5 characters in a story. I would write a half-page monologue in their
Mhm.
voice. Nothing complicated, and this probably won't make it into the thing, but like the prompt is what is something they really care about, and they're kind
Okay.
of making their case for it. It's like that's usually what the prompt is. It doesn't really matter. The point is that I'm trying to find through like the character making a case for something they really want in the kind of a Shakespearean soliloquy. They're just
Okay.
monologuing out of scene into the void. The character has the spotlight on them. They talk. And the exercise of trying to make that happen, I often find out a lot about who the person is. And I discover things like, oh, wow. Yeah, they really, it's not the thing of like, oh, the character told me something, but it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I through process of trying to make the character real in the moment, kind of found colors that I like about them. And maybe some information comes out of that. And some of it might be like, oh, I made the character say something that contradicts the outline. Why did I do that? Because this feels right.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look back at the outline and be like, maybe I should change this type of sort of placement or whatever. And maybe this because I don't do as much front work in that aspect of backstory. And I use the monologue as kind of like a way to be like, what's their vibe? How do they talk? And that tells me some background information. But having a
So,
1 page on
yeah.
monologue, that's it. Yeah.
So I'm very literal. So you said that it has to be about something important to them.
Yes.
What's a couple questions that you could quote unquote ask your character to kind of get them to go on this monologue?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't really go beyond the want to get.
Hmm.
It's kind of verbalizing the want to get. That's really what it is. And I've never articulated it that way before, but that's kind of like I have always asked in terms of front work for the outline.
Hmm.
What does this character want in a macro sense in the story? What do they do to get what they want in the story? And what happens that's really bad if they don't get it? And usually it's the character talking about that. And
Yeah.
whatever aspect of that is energy. Like maybe they're really afraid of what happens if they don't get the thing they want. And they just start talking about that. Or they really talk about the why of why they want the thing. Or they talk about there's a problem with doing and
Yeah.
I'm struggling with that. It's one of those 3 things that you can have you could do a monologue for if you really want to be anal retentive intellectual exercise. You could do one monologue for each aspect of that and really probably discover a lot about the character. Like I'm going to write a monologue about why they want the thing. I'm going to do a monologue about the process of doing to get what they want. And then I'm
Yeah.
going to write a monologue about what happens fear-wise if they don't get it.
So it's kind of interesting. You almost, as you were talking, the want do get is very, very close to like objective motivation and stakes, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like
Yes.
you could say like it's very tied to the narrative objective of the actual story that you're writing. So your monologue technique could not exist outside of the world of your screenplay. It's not about anything in their
Absolutely.
entire world. It's about specifically who they are in your story. That's
Absolutely.
interesting.
And just full clarity, I have never done 3 monologues for a character. I've always just done this is the monologue for the character, and it's one of those 3 aspects that is
Yeah.
naturally teased upon. And I think you're right. It completely depends. Like I would never write that monologue if I didn't know kind of what the outline of the story was and kind of already knew the answers of what they would talk about. Intuitively or not. It's because the front loading is about the plot construction, but then like the discovery aspect in that moment is like, okay, I need to find out how the school teacher talks. Okay, let's explore
Yeah.
this. It's an exercise also possibly to get unstuck, right? Like in outlining, if you're really excited to get to words, writing a monologue is useful because you'll have that sense of, okay, I know the voice. I
Yeah.
can recreate that voice in another scene. Um,
It
yeah,
also might
that's my
help
tool.
because some people get frustrated by the fact that you aren't going to pages until later in the process. So,
Hmm.
if you've only done sort of the loose basic tentpole outline, this might be a good way to let yourself actually write something and just kind of
Yeah.
go and oh, there's my dog. To just kind of, she she is very loud. Anyway, but yeah, it's one of those things where like, you might be frustrated by the fact that you are outlining so much of the script and that I know that our technique, at least, is very much front loaded. So it's a while before you actually just get to sit down and go to pages. And also, some people have questions about, like, should it really be this structured? Like, I'm more of a go by the seat of my pants type of writer. And this
Sure.
gives you the chance to do that a bit, which is a cool bonus is that you get to write sooner and you get to kind of just wing it, which is nice. So
Definitely. So tell me one of your development tools.
trying to decide which one to do first, but I think I'm gonna go with the longer listy one. So this was actually a worksheet that I believe was shared by Avi with us some years ago. And for anyone watching, I'm gonna pull it up and I'll also include a link to it later. But essentially, this is yeah, it's a huge questionnaire with probably over like 100 questions about your character. And
Wow.
it goes into everything, like basic questions, appearance, personality, blah 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 blah. And as I have said before, though, I don't necessarily care about a lot of that stuff. The part that I am particularly interested in is one subsection of this, which is past and future. So, I
Mm.
when I'm coming up with a character, it's really, really, really easy for me as someone who does world building a lot to fall into the trap of caring way too much about extra stuff. And so instead, I really try to focus on the story of the character, is kind of how I think about it. Um, which is
Mm.
essentially like what has happened to them? What have they gone through? How did they get to where they are? And what kind of events form the belief that they're working with in the story. And so there's a list of questions here, and not all of them are going to be particularly relevant, but I'll just read some of them. So like you'll pick and choose what feels relevant to the character that you're developing based on the story you're trying to tell. But it says like, what was your character like as a baby? What were they like as a child? Did they grow up rich or poor? Did they grow up nurtured or neglected? What's the most offensive thing they've ever said? What's their greatest achievement? What was their first kiss like? What's the worst thing they ever did to someone they love? And it gets into a lot of childhood stuff, which you know is a big part of who we are. Um, Best memory, worst memory, smell that reminds them of childhood, imaginary friends. I really like the question, when was the last time they were crushed with disappointment? Just brutal. I think that that's great. But I think that this kind of thing really helps me to start painting a picture of where they're coming from so that I can later write where they're going.
Mm.
So I'll share this worksheet. There's a lot of other sections on here that maybe people would like, education and hobbies, how they handle conflict, which is very interesting. Um, but I'm just going to focus for right now on this kind of past and future section. Um, and I guess it's worth saying that I never actually like sit down, print this out, and write in all the answers to this. But this is the kind of thing that really just helps me start saying, like, okay, how did this person grow up? Like, what was their
Mm.
deal? Um, how many people, like, were they happy? Were they not? Like,
Were
what
they an
is
only child? Do they have
yeah,
siblings? The older or youngest sibling, right?
yeah.
Um,
Did they
those types
fake
of
a
questions are important in terms of like hypothetically being like, what is this person's vibe? You know,
yeah.
because if they're a youngest child, you in real life you can tell, or like myself, I'm an only child. You can usually tell when somebody's an only child
Yes, you can.
based on their vibe. You know, and that's relevant in terms of character creation. Sometimes being like, oh, I know their vibe because at the end of the day, we're all talking that we're talking about tangibles to get to intangibles, and the intangible is the voice. voice
Yeah.
is really hard to describe, right? It's a thing we read. We know it when we see it. We know when a character is activated. And there's some writers who do it really easily, and there's some writers who do it struggle very, very much to get there. But regardless of how you do it, it's like you got to find your way to make voices real on the page. And I
Yeah.
think mine is more context of the thing driven,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I'll admit my first drafts are usually pretty weak on voice, probably, with the exception of like the characters who I really know. Like side characters get better for me in later drafts after I've really examined, be like, oh, that scene is low subtext. I need to do better. Then I ask myself, okay, what's happening in the scene? What's real? What's not real? Um, whereas if you did front loaded, that character who has two scenes is a middle child. Your first stab at it might be a little bit more connected to something because you've
Yeah.
done that exploratory work. I'm just guessing here. I mean,
No, yeah, it's true. And I think that, like, sometimes it's just knowing one detail about them that is very, very evocative.
yes,
Like, for an absolutely completely random example, if they faked a limp in middle school, um,
that's a
then
very revealing piece of information that
it
tells
is
you
a
a lot
very
about what that person's capable of.
it does. But it's like what there's like a moment where that tells you so much about at least where the person came from that you get to start kind of imagining like, okay, I can see this character. So sometimes it's not like sometimes you're asking all these questions just to find the kernel like that. Like what was their deal? Did they collect paper clips as a kid? Like what was
Mm,
their thing? And that can help you kind of understand who they are at on a core level. And actually, it gives you a really good succinct one-liner to introduce the character in the script. Like it can really give you an insight into who they are. Um but yeah, so that's my second one. Just thinking about the story, or my first one, which is just thinking about the story of your character. So I'm curious what your other one is, Adam.
Oh, yes. So my other one is this is my listy thing, and both of these tools are things that I've actually used in some form or the other. Because at the end of
Mhm.
the day, every project is different. Every project in different phases of my life, I've approached problems in different ways, right? But later, as I've gotten older as a writer, more mature, quote unquote, I have really kind of my in for character is like I come up with like one powerful belief statement for
Yeah.
every major character, right? Like for me, that's like a big four, and I like to think of that as their flaw. Like I think it has to be a statement that has like emotional power for the character that is like tied to how they see the world, right? The example I always use, and I need to think of more examples off the top of my head, but like, I'll never be loved until I get the promotion at my
Yeah.
job, right? But like, I'll never be loved until I get this thing. It's a false belief about life, right? And if that character has that false belief about life and they're making choices because they believe something that's untrue, inherently there's character arc built into that, right? And it's kind of like
Yeah.
if I can find like the power statement for all the characters, um, it creates a canvas and a mosaic. Like if you have 8 characters all listed and I see all their belief statements next to each other, this is the exercise for me. Do they all make sense in the same story?
Yeah.
Like does it feel like there's thematic unity here? Do different characters, like for example, using that example about the character who getting the promotion, okay, this character has an emotional damage about being loved and being seen. They have placed it in the wrong thing. Is there a character who has kind of the inverse of that belief, right?
Yeah.
Right. So like you have a character who desperately wants love and is looking for it in the wrong places, right? You could have a character who isn't interested in being vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? That's a similar emotional pain in a similar kind of canvas. But like if you had like a character who is in a completely different emotional universe, their problem and their journey to solve that problem might feel kind of irrelevant to
Yeah.
kind of the bundle of problems you're dealing with. Like if you want to tell a story of a mafia story about loyalty and family or something, having a character talk about like their dreams as being a painter and like kind of being taken serious as an artist, unless it related back to family and loyalty and like that
Yeah.
those big that soup of thematic ideas, it'll feel like a different story necessarily. So like I'm not saying that you have to have different characters all have different belief statements that are all, whatever. It's not a mathematical thing, but it's kind of like a vibe check. Like if you write out your major 5 to 8 characters, and you've like got your power statement that defines how they see the world. It's the lie that a great way I like to talk about it is like it's the lie they tell themselves about the world they live in.
Yeah.
Right.
And
The reason it's a lie is it's a flaw, right? You want your characters to be flawed.
yeah, and it's fun because, a lot of times all of us have lies we tell ourselves that like we have to go work out in therapy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're never the whole picture. It's always like the tip of the iceberg or like one string in the knot that is actually connected to a ton of things that you do because of that core belief. So like if you,
Yeah.
for example, have this belief that, until I get the promotion, I won't be lovable, then what that means is if you met an amazing person before you got the promotion, you might avoid them. I don't want to say avoid them like the plague because clearly we don't care that much about
Well, you
plague.
might not
But
trust it as being real,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
you might think it's
Like,
fake. You like, no, you don't really love me. I'm not good enough yet. You might avoid it, and then you might be 20 times more likely to undercut somebody else at work because to get the promotion because you think that that is
mm-hmm.
your only way to be happy. You might think that if you have a family, you might think that everyone's kind of lying to you and that it's like fake, that they don't like love you yet fully. Like,
Yeah.
there might be all these different things that affect the way that you behave and like the actions that you choose to take. And so it tells you more than just like what they believe. It tells you why they do everything that they do. And it can help you decide what the character would do in a particular situation. And I think that the
Definitely.
reason why you want to make sure that you have your character's beliefs in the same universe is so that they have conflict because all drama is conflict, right? So it's
Because if you have two characters who have really emotionally charged beliefs about the same thing,
yeah,
like, not saying I'll never be loved if I get the promotion, but the promotion makes you unlovable is a
yeah,
belief a other character could have, right? Like, and that those two things are fundamentally in conflict. If you have a character who's working for the promotion, they're the character who's like, don't get that, you'll become somebody who I won't recognize, right? Like that's conflict right there. A great example is Little Miss Sunshine.
yeah. That
The
was good.
whole theme of the story is about being a winner, what it means to be a winner, what it means to be a loser in America, right? And Greg Kinnear, sorry, I forget the character's name, but the dad, his whole thing is, I'm a winner and no one in my family can be a loser no matter what,
Yeah,
right? Like he won't accept it. And the whole thing that he needs to realize is that, every single member of that family is dealing with a huge personal failure,
yeah,
right? And his daughter is about to jump into a situation that is most definitely going to end in failure, right?
yeah,
So, what does that mean? If you're no longer a winner, how can you love yourself and your family, right? Like every member of that family, whether it's the Steve Carell's character who just lost tenure and had his lover, have an affair with another man, or Paul Dano, the son, whose dream is to be a fighter pilot, but he realizes that he's colorblind, so his dream is never going to come true. Like they all
yeah,
have failed dreams. All of their dreams are crashing down, and they're all in a van together. So, like, if you write out every belief statement of all those characters, they all relate to that theme of being winners and losers. It's all the same universe.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, for sure.
that's a
And then
so it's just about the relationship between all those things, right? All those statements feel
yeah,
in the same universe.
no, for sure. I think that to me is the sign of a movie that really goes above and beyond is when it's not even something that's necessarily apparent when you're first watching the film of like why it all
Mm,
feels so connected and so good, but it's one of those things where I think Pixar movies tend to do this particularly well, where like everybody has a different answer to the one core thematic question.
right.
Um and and then everybody's kind of fighting to express their take on the situation, and eventually the protagonist grows to accept a new belief. So if they believe at the beginning of the film that a promotion is the only way to ever be loved, then in the end they realize that, you know, the promotion is never gonna, like, the love is unconditional, it's not related to the promotion. Or if it's an anti-hero thing, they say, if I get the promotion, I don't need love, you know? Like they're it's important that the statement changes. Um and then I want to share my last one with you because I think it actually ties into this pretty well. So what I'm what I did here was I really was like, what the heck do I even do? Like when I'm sitting and I'm thinking about building out a character, like what are the kinds of questions that I ask myself as I'm building out a character? Because a lot of it is just like letting it kind of simmer in my head. And so I put this together, and I'm actually pretty proud of my acronym that I made. But
Amazing.
it is bruise, like brewing something. You know, maybe I can reorder it, but that was the best I could get it. But
Well, you're
basically,
brewing the character, you know?
yeah,
Like
that's good.
it's
You sold it to me.
there we go. I love it.
Yeah.
Bruce.
Yeah. But so bruise is B is beliefs, R is relationship, E is experience, W is wants, and S is speech. So basically, we're starting with belief, and this is exactly what you were just talking about, Adam. So, like, what is their answer to the thematic question? Like,
Mm,
what is their belief that is at the core of everything they do, and potentially like what other beliefs stem from this? So if it's the promotion thing, like they might believe like I need to do anything that I possibly can to get this promotion, even if it means screwing over everybody else. You know, like what are the ancillary beliefs that kind of stem out of the central statement? um and then relationship, in particular, I'm thinking about like what is their relationship to the protagonist? Because at least in like protagonist centric stories, like movies, everything you need to be able to like figure out
mm,
who they are in orbit to the protagonist. Like, are they going to be a mentor? Are they going to be their antagonist? Are they an ally? Are they an enemy? Like, what is their unique relationship to the protagonist? And you can also get very literal with this, like they're their brother who is an
mm,
antagonist, or you know, like this is the mail carrier who is their mentor figure. So like what is the relationship to the protagonist? And then I have E, which is experience, and this one is like, it was kind of what I was talking about before. This is really, I'm realizing it consolidates a lot of what we were talking about. But E is like, why are they the way that they are? So, like, where are they coming from in life? Um, what's their backstory? Like, what's the one nugget from their childhood of like, or like who they were before that summarizes the kind of person that they are? Like, what experiences formed them? Want is, you know, it's very simply like, this is like my objective and this is why I want it. So it's related to objective and motivation. Um, you can be like, another interesting way to kind of approach want is, what do they say they want and what don't they
mm,
say they want? You know, so it's like, do they want to be a rock star? And that's what they tell people, but they don't say that they actually want to like release songs that are super emotional and vulnerable, and like, you know, that they want to connect with people, and that's why they want to do this like cool rock star thing. Like, what do they tell you they want and what do they actually want? um and then the last one is just very straightforward, just speech. So, you know, speech patterns, habits, quirks. So just kind of figuring out the way that they talk. Are they
mm.
going to use a lot of slang? Do they, you know, do they try to use bigger words than they know how to use? Like, what's their deal? Um, and so those are the kind of questions that I have consolidated, that ask, and it's pretty funny how all the other things that we talked about today really fit
Or
into
just
each
kind
of
of
these.
fit into that acronym. So just
Yeah.
to reiterate, so the beliefs is just like the belief statement.
Yep.
Relationship, you could list how, like, if we made this like a really simple, easy worksheet, which I definitely
Hmm.
think we should do, our bruise worksheet. Okay, belief is the belief statement for the
Hmm.
character. Relationships, you list their how they relate to and what their relationship is with the other characters in the story.
Yep.
Experience is like a short bio of like their childhood.
Yeah.
We could ask
Like
some
what?
questions about that. Wants is their character objective in the story,
Hmm.
and speech is their half-page monologue.
Yeah. Exactly. So it fits very well with everything that we just said, which is kind of fun. But
I love it.
but I feel like this is all you really need to know. And sometimes people want to know more. But this is all you really, really need. And when I feel good about this, I 100% feel right. Like I feel ready to write this character. Um, but yeah, now let's see if we have questions about character development. We
Yes.
have a few.
So we have one from Rosetta B. Do you have any tips for developing a character that is not from Earth? My initial
Ooh,
reaction is whether they are a character who's not from Earth or they're from New Jersey, they're still
which is an
human.
Earth,
Like,
obviously.
or even if they are a non-human character, characters are imprinted from human imagination and therefore have human characteristics and desires, right? Like you, regardless of whatever, like what is relatable in storytelling are is what we can see in ourselves. So a character would be the same no matter where they would come from. Like fundamentally even if they have alien characteristics or you're doing like a really obtuse science fiction concept where okay they're actually a bug hive mind that is doesn't have empathy and they only communicate by wiggling their toes, okay fine, but that's a very fringe case. um like I'm thinking of Ender's Game, right? Like they could, the whole issue is they couldn't communicate with the hive mind the same way, right? But you need human characters, you need a human point of view to understand stories and to digest them. So whether or not they're from Earth or not, you still gotta give them wants and beliefs and flaws because they're characters.
No, for
I know,
sure.
Lexi, you have a different answer to that.
No, I mean it really ties into regardless of where they're from, if you do the work of like the bruise thing that we were talking about, it's particularly like connected to experience and like what them being an alien means about their belief. And so you would need to
Hmm.
think a lot about, just what is their backstory, them growing up on this alien planet, lead them to believe, and what were the formative things that happened to them as an alien that really help to shape other details about them. So, like, what were the most pivotal moments of their life? I would just treat it like any other because we can't really write from a non-human perspective. We just
Hmm.
we can't because it's who we are. So even when we're like one of my favorite books ever is The Art of Racing in the Rain, which is told from the perspective of a dog. And even when we do things like that, we very much humanize
Hmm.
the experience of being a dog. And so I would treat them like a human who has had very different experiences. So just, treat them like normal, but just give yourself more room to world build where they're from and then think about how that would affect the kind of person that they would become. That's that's my advice. It's the same that you would do for anybody from a culture that you're completely unfamiliar with. Right? It's like you have to kind of imagine, okay, I've never been here. I've never lived in the 1400s and done this, but what I know about that society and that culture mean about how they act and feel? Um, I'll just treat it like they're someone from history rather than, worrying too much about them being not of Earth.
We have a
Um,
follow-up question which is very similar, which is any tips on characters on androids that's like humans? So androids, characters that are similar to um, humans but are created by humans, specifically an android.
mhm.
I think it depends on what your opinion on technology is and what your story is about, right? Like if your story is about like modern day portrayals of AI, you will have a different characterization
Yeah.
than if it was about like some futuristic positronic brain, which is the Isaac Asimov science fiction concept for an iRobot. It's a human. It has consciousness. It has feelings that are real. We've created consciousness, right? Like so, like it depends on what you want your story to be about. Um,
Yeah.
because sometimes portrayals of AI are very much like, oh, the AI is only giving performative, like it's pretending to be like humans, but it doesn't because we programmed it. Versus, oh, did we program consciousness and it's like humans, or in
Yeah.
certain ways. Her is a great
I
example.
I agree with this because it's like I would first figure out what exactly androids are in this world, how independent they are, or like the type of AI that you're playing with here, kind of like what Adam was saying. So figuring out how AI works in your world first to like similar to the alien to like set up what their culture is essentially
Mm.
like what is their culture, what are their capabilities, are they just a reflection of who created them or are they something else, are they something original, figure out all those backstory details and then just answer the same questions that you would normally. um and I think that it's I always think it's really fun to kind of create those characters and because you know that one of the formative things about their life most likely like one of their formative experiences is the moment like when they knew that they were an android would be a good one or like do they know that they are at all.
Right. Oh, we lost Alexi,
I came back.
and you're back. Okay, fantastic.
Sorry but
You were
yeah.
just mid sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, it just anyway the long story short is figuring out you know, what are the most formative moments in an android's life, in this android's life, and writing those out and figuring out how it would affect their beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And to answer Jim's, this is a great question. Probably a no, but does your BRUISE acronym have a hierarchy in it? Because it feels like belief can influence everything below it.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it
Absolutely, in my
does.
opinion.
It I had never
Um,
thought of that, but it actually does really work like that.
yeah, because speech is the end product of this,
Yeah.
right? And belief, just in how that's how I think of it. Like it is the kernel, it is the seed, it is like everything comes from that. Like the choices they make, what they do and don't do, how they talk. It should all come from, what do they believe about their world,
Yeah.
and how is that a lie they tell themselves, right? Like that's kind of, if you got that, you've got so much. Like I really believe that, and maybe that's just how my brain works. Like other stuff can come and go, but so if we think about it, you could make the argument that wants might could be higher, but maybe not because
Yeah.
no, because you need the experience of relationship informs what you want specifically. So beliefs goes to relationships, to experience, to wants, and then finally speech.
Yeah. So
You're
I feel
smart.
a lot smarter than I knew. Look at that.
And you're brewing characters, right? So
I'll put a little coffee like thing on there, like
yeah, hey,
when we
this
make the
is this is the
worksheet. Mhm.
you're gonna bruise your character. I love that, and the double
Yeah.
meaning of beating the crap out of them.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you do as a writer. I also just
Yeah.
shared a link, which is going to be in the description, to it's actually a folder within the character vault that we've had for a while, but we need to actually start putting stuff in it called resources. And so I dropped in just like the bruise, um, this like paper that I'm sharing, which is just the acronym and the character questionnaire that I mentioned. But I think that we will make a worksheet that actually asks specific questions of Bruise to like make it more useful. So we will work on that and we will share it probably in the Discord if anyone wants to keep an eye out for it there. Um, let's see. Do we have another question?
I
I
think we're
think that might.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've copyrighted it officially. There we go. Yeah, it's
Oh,
copyrighted.
totes. Totes. I copyrighted it.
This is a Young Screenwriters worksheet now. Great job, Alexie.
Thanks. Thank you. You know,
Because it does encapsulate everything we were talking about,
who
I don't know.
knew? Who knew?
All right.
But
Well, thanks
cool.
so much, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Adam, for sharing your character development stuff. I think that it's really kind of fun, especially because you and I come at stories from such a different angle, to be like,
Mhm.
okay, so how do you actually approach this very specific part of the process? And, where do your characters come from? And some people start with characters even more than either of us do.
Mhm.
Like they might fill out that entire worksheet that I shared about a character before they even know what their story is. That is a valid way to
Despicable.
approach. Despicable.
No, it's not.
I was gonna
It's
say it's
completely
valid, and Adam
unvalid.
said it was
No,
despicable.
no. It's if you do that, you're not actually a writer. I don't care if you have books, you have success. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. Whatever gets you there, and also so much of writing is just psychological,
It
right?
is.
Like, what do you need to do to get pages, and to make those pages good, right? Different people need different levels of safety. And I've had journeys about that. Like I used to believe in mild outlining, then I believed in iron tight, extremely detailed outlining, and now I'm kind of like, yeah, you need the outline, but like it's okay if it changes. If you have a better idea on the day, well, you had
Yeah.
a better idea. There you go. Be loose. Like whereas John Warren is very anti that. He's like, you have to write the
Yeah.
outline you figured out ahead of time. And like, listen, I disagree with that, but everybody has
Well,
their own
yeah.
opinion.
No, it's true. And you know what? If you love building characters and you don't play D&D, I'm gonna ask you why. Because that is such a fun that's a fun place to get out some of your like, I want to make a bunch of different characters feelings is by playing like tabletop RPGs and stuff. Sometimes it's just fun to like use that format and kind of the archetypes that are built in to just create a bunch of characters. Um but yeah, it's fun. Characters are fun. So thank you so much everybody, and also please don't hesitate to let us know if there's a topic that you want us to kind of explore in the future. We would love to hear from you and to see you in the Discord. All right.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everybody.